In order to perform depot level testing on the AARGM missile, we'll need a Cambry test set and an AARGM Box 5. Or the AARGM Box 5 is officially known as the MX12348-USM. Okay, this is the AARGM Box 5, and there's, as you can see, 3 cases. Box 1 of 3, Box 2 of 3, and Box 3 of 3. So what we'll do before we use the AARGM Box 5 is an inspection of each case. Starting with Box 1 of 3, let's perform an inspection of the exterior. First, starting with the case itself. Make sure there's no gouges, dents, scratches, punctures, or anything that would affect the integrity of the container itself. And this looks pretty good. So we move on to an inspection of the lifting handles. Make sure the lifting handles are there and operational. And then we inspect each of the latches. Make sure the latches are there and working. Latches all look pretty good. And finally, we will inspect the depressurization button and then actually depressurize the container. So, box 1 looks good. We'll go to box 2 of 3. Looking at the container itself, again, looking for punctures, scratch, dents, gouges, anything that would affect the integrity of the container. Next, we look at the lifting handles. All look good. The latches, all present and functional. And finally, depressurize and inspect the depressurization button. And it looks good as well. Okay, on to box 3. Box 3 of 3 obviously is a little larger than the first 2. So we'll do an inspection of the case. Bottom of the case looks good. Sides, set it down. Top of the case looks good. And front of the case looks good. Okay. Handles, inspection of the lifting handles. Lifting handles are good. Inspect the latches. Okay, the latches all look good. And finally, inspect the depressurization button and depressurize. Okay, all 3 cases have been inspected. Now what we'll do is an inspection and inventory of each of the individual cases. Now that we've performed a visual inspection of all 3 AARGM Box 5 cases, we'll do an inspection of the contents of each individual case, starting with Box 1 of 3. So the first thing we want to do, we've already depressurized the container. We'll release all 6 latches and remove the cover of the lid. You can see there's nothing in the cover of this one. We'll concentrate on the base of this container. So, box 1 of 3, AARGM Box 5. The first thing we want to do with this is inspect the faceplate of this to make sure that there's no dents, gouges, scratches, or anything else that would affect the operation of the Box 1. So it looks good. Next thing we want to do is inspect the individual connectors for each of the cables that will plug into this. So remove the protective covers and inspect the connectors for bent pins or foreign debris. Those all look good. The final one is the GPS, and that looks good as well. So the final thing we want to do is check out each one of these indicator lamps and make sure they're not broken and they're all in good shape. So that concludes the inspection on Box 1. We visually inspected all 3 cases of the AARGM Box 5, and we've inspected the contents of Box 1. Now we're going to inspect the contents of Box 2. So the first thing we want to do is depressurize, make sure it's depressurized, and release the latches so we can remove the cover. Okay, we take off the lid. And the first thing you see is a list of contents. You want to make sure that the contents in your container actually matches the contents that's in the container. So we depress these two buttons and open the lid, and that's our GPS simulator. So let's remove the GPS simulator and do an inspection of it. So the first thing we want to do is check out the actual case. Make sure there's no gouges, dents, scratches, or anything that's going to affect the integrity of the container. And then check the faceplate. Make sure the faceplate's in good shape, and make sure none of the buttons or dials are missing, and make sure there's no foreign debris in our connector. And then do the same with the back. Faceplate looks good. Each individual connector. Checking for bent pins on the male connectors and foreign debris on the female connectors. Looks good. Okay, so we'll replace the GPS simulator. Okay, and that's the last thing on our list. But now we'll go through this list and make sure we have all the cables that are supposed to be in here. So starting with W7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and going all the way through 14. So, cable W7, cable W8, cable W9, W10, W11, W12, W13, and W14. So we have all the cables. Now what we're going to do is individually inspect each cable. So we start with the connectors. Again, make sure there's no foreign debris in the female connectors. And these happen to both be female connectors. And make sure the shells of the connectors are in good shape. Connectors look good. So we'll inspect the cable. Cable looks good. So we'll just work our way back. That was W14, this is W13. Female connector, no foreign debris. Connector shell looks good. Male connector, no bent pins. Connector shell looks good. And the cable itself is good. So replace the protective covers. Move on to W12. P and C connectors. Okay, both connectors look good. And the cable itself also looks good. So W11. Connector looks good. No bent bends. The cable looks good. W10. No foreign debris in the female connector. Connector shell looks good. And that connector looks good. So let's check out the cable. Don't see any fraying or any damage. So that looks good. On to W9. Male connector. No bent pins, connector shell looks good. The other side, you just connect it, you're just inspecting the connector shell because there's no pins or nothing to plug in and out of this thing. So inspect that shell, looks good. And then finally, cable, no fraying or damage anywhere, looks good. So W8. Male connector, all the pins look good. Connector shell looks good. Female connector, no foreign debris. and that connector shell looks good. Cable, no fraying or damage. Cable's good. And finally W7, the Y cable. So one connector on this end. The male connector, no bent pins. Connector shell looks good. The other end, another male connector. Pins all look good. Connector shell looks good. Finally, the last connector, again a male connector, no bent pins. Shell looks good. And finally, the cable itself. Don't see any fraying, damage, cracking. Cable looks good. So that completes the inspection of case 2. Okay, we've inspected each individual case of the Argom Box 5, and we've inventoried and inspected case 1 and case 2, which leaves us with an inventory and inspection of case 3. And you can see this case is rather large. So first thing we want to do is depressurize it, release the latches. And remove the lid. All right, the lid is basically just foam packing material, but it also has a contents list. So we're going to inventory this container based on the contents list on the inside of the lid. Okay, so the first thing on the contents list is a front shield, which we have right here. Front shield. And the second thing is the mid shield, the shield that goes over the control section. I'll lift this up so you can see how these are packed. Be careful when you're lifting this up because you can see the mid shield is strapped down, but the front shield is not. So you want to be careful that this doesn't fall out and get damaged. So front shield, mid shield, and then we also have 4 cables, W15, W16, W17, and W18. The cables are all underneath the mid shield, so we'll release the straps, take out the mid shield, and inventory the cables. So we have W16, W15, W17, and finally W18. Okay, so we've got everything in the box that's on our contents list. So we've inventoried and everything's here. Now we're going to do inspection. We'll start with W18. So we want to remove the protective caps on the connectors and inspect each connector. So we've got a male and female connector. So make sure on the male connectors there's no bent pins or foreign debris. And on the female connector there's no foreign debris. And then make sure the shells of each connector are in good shape. These look good. So we'll replace the protective caps and then do an inspection of the cable itself. No fraying, no cracking. The cable looks like it's in pretty good shape. So we'll work our way back and do the same inspection of these 3 cables. So each connector and the cable. Each connector and the cable. And finally the last cable, each connector. And inspect the cable. Looks good. Okay, once we've inspected all the cables, we'll inspect our shields. So like I said, this is called the mid shield, and it actually goes over the control section of the Argo. So the first thing we want to do is check the underside. This is the actual part of the shield that connects with or attaches to the missile. So we want to make sure that the shield and the GPS is in good shape, no scratches, dents, gouges. Make sure that they're clean, and then make sure that the inside of the shield is in good shape. And also we have a button right here. Make sure that that's working. That actually tells the test set when it's on a missile, when it's on a missile, when it's depressed. So make sure that that's working, otherwise the shield won't work. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is inspect the latches. You can see there's latches and straps on here, so the mid shield doesn't fall off the control section. So we'll release and connect those latches, make sure that they're in good working order, and make sure the straps look good and aren't going to break. Okay, next we'll look at the connectors. This shield has 4 connectors to it, and we'll make sure that every point that we're going to connect the cable to, that connector is free of debris and not cracked, broken, dented, or we don't have any bent pins. Okay, connectors all look pretty good. So we place those protective covers. Okay, the final thing we have is the strain relief valve on the cables. So this is actually a holder for the cables that connect to the missile. So it takes the strain off the actual connectors and holds the cables tight in this. So make sure that this is free and loose and is working. And as well, you have a release. You can release that pressure relief unit. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we'll replace it back in the container. And when you're replacing it, make sure your straps are up so you can strap it down once you get it in there. Reconnect the straps. Okay, then we'll do an inspection of the front shield. So the first thing we want to do is inspect the interior. Make sure there's no foreign debris in there. Make sure there's no obvious signs of wear or anything damaged. It looks good. Next we want to inspect the actual shell of the connector, the shield. Looking for dents, gouges, scrapes, anything that might affect the performance of it. And it looks pretty good. So finally, we're going to inspect the connectors. So we'll remove the connector covers. And do an inspection of the connectors. Again, looking for foreign debris, bent pins, or any damaged connectors. These all look good. So we'll replace the connector covers. Replace the shield in the container bottom. And box 3 of 3 is inspected and ready to use.